So we are back for the second trauma chat. No, I'm going to try that again. That sounds like it's like fireside chats about trauma.
Actually, really appropriate.
No.
Without fires on the inside.
Oh, everything's on fire. Everything's on fire. That can be our fireside chat, is because everything is on fire.
Everything's on fire.
So we are back for the second conversation in the series about creativity, productivity, and trauma. I'm Bianca Mauro from BRM Production Management with Taryn Longo from the Mastery Studio. So Taryn is a somatic trauma therapist, and we began these discussions talking about what is trauma and why is what's going on right now traumatic, which might seem very obvious to some, but not so much to others. And we ended the last conversation by beginning to talk about, now that we've established that we're dealing with trauma, how can we learn to self-regulate? So Taryn, you mentioned to me a nature video that I thought was a really great explanation. But you start wherever you want. And
yes. Okay. So, my gosh, that long explanation of this nature video. When you try to explain a video instead of just showing a video, it's always really interesting. But yeah, I think that this is important, the nature video, just to go back to what you said before about it might be obvious that we're going through a time of trauma, but not for everyone. I think what's difficult, like people are not so sure about, is what that actually means. So like we might know that we're going through a traumatic event, right? But the reality is that trauma is actually not the event itself. It's the way that it's held within our system. So meaning like our nervous system within our bodies. Usually like trauma is really, really held in our bodies. So we can kind of intellectually understand something and intellectually move through something and kind of reconcile with it on an intellectual plane. Like, this is what's happening. I understand it, you know? But our bodies got thrown into a survival mode because of the traumatic event. And so trauma is actually how we hold it in our bodies. And understanding that is essential to be able to truly move through trauma. Otherwise, we go into the event, the traumatic event, so to speak, is over. We move into the next phase of our life, but our bodies have not gotten the signal that we are out of the woods, that we are not at threat anymore. And so our bodies stay in a space of threat and then carry over into the next phases of our life. And that's where we get hit with a lot of the limitations, and we get trauma, like we said in the first video, I think, is a limited capacity state, meaning we are only able to access fight, flight, or freeze responses within ourselves, or variations of that within ourselves. That brings me to the nature video, which is
which I will try to find and put in here. But
you know, the video is amazing. It's something that we were given, shown in like one of like my most beginner trainings in this work, in somatic work, and I've used it all throughout these years since, because it's so useful to actually see. And maybe we can supply a link for it or something on YouTube if that's not illegal. I don't know
either. We'll find out.
We'll find out. But the video is basically, it's a cheetah that is attacking an impala, and the impala plays dead. So the cheetah is lying with the impala in its mouth. The impala is playing dead. And then I'm pretty sure some hyenas come. Some other wild animal comes. I think it was hyenas. Come and chase the cheetah away. So we see the cheetah leave, because I think it was like hyenas and gorillas. Not that that matters what it was, but anyway, trying to remember accurately. These other animals come and scare the cheetah away. And the video is just of the impala lying there after it was playing dead. And at first you see it completely still. So that's a full dissociation. So our animal instinct is, when we are at threat, we have fight, flight, or freeze responses to save our lives. In this case, playing dead, freeze, would be what would save the impala's life. So its physiology completely shifts to stop everything except for the most necessary things to keep it alive. So you see it in a complete freeze state, but the cheetah's gone. And so after a few minutes, you can start to see the impala's breathing starts to change. You can see its stomach rise. You can't see in the video, but most likely its eyes would start watering because the physiology is shifting to turn it back on, right? To turn the systems back on. And you'll see after it starts breathing and after it starts coming back, the impala does this thing that's really weird that we don't do as humans, but it starts shaking. And it, like, what it's doing is it's discharging all of the stored trauma response energy. So everything that was stored when it went into freeze, it releases, it discharges it. And by discharging all of that, it's putting its nervous system back to neutral. And then when it gets up and runs off, which it does, now that trauma is over, its system is regulated again, and it's back into the present moment because it's an animal.
So what you're saying is I just need like a good shake.
Very often, yes. Actually. But that's sort of this like overall metaphor, so to speak, for what it is, and quite literal at the same time, for what it is that we need to do as humans. Because as humans, we have our rational brains that we think like makes the trauma over. Like we understand, okay, now the pandemic is over, I'm back to work, whatever it is that you're thinking about. But your body is still storing that response energy, and depending on what that was for you. So you might be in a lot of panic, you might be more depressed or in dissociation, but we need to, as humans, sort of signal to our nervous system that we are safe again, that we are no longer at threat. So there's like, there's a book that's called The Body Keeps Score. There's a bunch of books by Peter Levine on somatic experiencing. Those kind of, there's a Polyvagal Theory if you want to get really nerdy. But all of these things are how our nervous system knows if we are at threat or believes we're still at threat. So it's like a sense of safety that we need.
Is there any way to self-regulate right now? Because, we may not be safe.
Right.
Yet we may not be back at work, and some people, myself included, may not be going back to work for quite some time. So
Right.
Is there anything that we can do right now that might help us sort of break through that fight, flight, or freeze and be able to access parts of our creativity, parts of our productivity that might be held up by those somatic processes?
Yeah, and they are held up because when we're in survival mode, then our system prioritizes what we need to survive, and the creativity and those functions kind of go out the window in that. So we do want that for a lot of reasons. Also, we just want to have a healthier system and be able to be present in our lives. So self-regulation also depends upon our ability to have like that inner self-awareness where we know what it is that we even need to regulate. So as a basic starter, I would say to start developing that felt sense by doing really simple body scans. You don't have to get into some serious meditation or do anything like that's too woo-woo for anybody, you know what I mean? But if you just sit with yourself for 5 minutes when you wake up or even throughout the day, just to check in with yourself and just scan your body. What do you notice in your forehead between your eyes? Is it tight? Is it gripping? What do you notice in your jaw? What do you notice in your chest and your stomach? What do you notice in your legs and your feet? Just kind of bring yourself through, scan your body and notice, do you feel gripping? Do you feel tense? Do you feel nothing at all? Oftentimes we might feel like an achiness or a tenderness in our heart, like things like that. Like, what do you feel as you go through your body? And then you'll start to develop what we call a felt sense. And you can
So it's not even really about doing anything about it. It's just
not first
about noticing it. Okay.
Yeah, not at first. If you already know how to do that, you know how to check in with your body. If you don't know, you have to develop that first, honestly. And you can look at it with like from a sensation perspective. So in somatic work, we tend to take the narrative out of things and we just work with the nervous system as much as possible. So we'll say like instead of anxiety, if you feel, we'll call it activation. So we just focus on the sensation that we're feeling in our body. So that's that like pulsing, vibrating feeling that we all know as anxiety. Really, that's just high activation saying that our nervous system is saying we're at threat. It's like an alarm system going off saying danger, danger, danger. the other side of the coin would be dissociation, where we just feel numb, zombie like, autopilot, just like not there, not present, and like just kind of like down. So that's kind of like a low state, and you can kind of feel that in your body by not feeling anything, if that makes sense, you know. So if you don't have that felt sense developed yet, you're not used to anything that I'm like, if I sound like I am making no sense and like this is the craziest thing, then probably where you would start is developing the felt sense and just working on doing a very simple body scan where you notice whatever you can notice without much pressure, and just do it every day regularly, and soon you will start noticing more and you'll start developing that sense. The next stage is, once you know what you're feeling, to work with it. So if you start to feel,
say I'm feeling grippy, say I'm feeling, you know, you're activated,
yeah.
activated. Say I'm waking up and I am like all sorts of activated and don't want to be like that all day.
Yeah. So if you start to feel all sorts of activated and you don't want to feel that all day, one tool you can use is called orientation. And when you're like that, right, your system is super activated, it takes you out of the present moment because now it thinks you're at threat. So if you use your eyes, scan the room 360 degrees all the way around, let your eyes land on something neutral. And I really mean neutral. It can be like the corner of the ceiling. Try not to let it land on something that has like an emotional charge to it. So not necessarily like a picture or something like that. Usually like the walls or a plant or something are really good. So you could let your eyes land. I'm looking at the ceiling right now, and the ceiling is white. It's a little bit of a different white than the walls. The walls are also white, and you just start to name what you see. And there's this response that happens where it brings your nervous system back to the present moment. So when you do that, it signals to your nervous system, this is where we are, and that threat mode kind of dissipates a little bit. You become in a more regulated state, and from there, you can kind of work with your body a little bit more. Use some deep breaths, ignite your parasympathetic nervous system, which is like the brakes. So if the high anxiety is like a rise, you kind of want to put some brakes on it. So deep, long inhale, long, slow exhale. We'll put those brakes on your nervous system. Feel your feet on the ground for grounding, quite literally, to feel some grounding in you. And then just move slowly into the next thing, and move very slowly after that. Does that make sense? Is that helpful?
It does. It does. And then on the flip side, you know, if I'm stuck, if I'm having a day, or sometimes not even a whole day, sometimes I'll wake up activated and then end up stuck. You know, it's really, there's a wide range of things that go on. But if I am in that sort of stuck state, you know, what are some ways that I can kind of just unstick myself? And even if it's not accomplishing anything incredible, just accomplish something.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes it depends. Like the easy thing to say is like, well, movement. If you're stuck, like some light movement kind of helps. But sometimes there's some emotion in there that's just so big that you need to have space to process it. So it depends. It's different for every person. But sometimes I have people, like, if they're into writing, like try to at least get some writing out of what it is that they're feeling. Like go for a walk where it's a slow walk and you're like allowing yourself some presence, where you're like feeling your feet hitting the ground. You're trying to look around you and you're making some space to like feel what is stuck in there.
While wearing all the proper PPE, right?
Right, while wearing a mask, only if you're allowed to go for walks, for sure. But I think most places can walk now, right?
I mean, I'm not going to be presumptuous, but yeah. But if you can't walk, well, there we go.
Close.
There we go.
Anyway, so my 8-year-old says that learning on Saturdays and Sundays is illegal. But anyway, yeah. And you know, part of why you might end the day feeling that is because throughout the day you have felt so much stuff, you know, like you're dealing with so much stuff. And like going back to our first little episode of this, trauma is when life hands you too much to be able to process at once. It's a state of overwhelm. So that's why these little regulation tools, using our breath, looking around the room when it gets too high, some light movement, gentle movement when we're feeling dissociated, and trying to actually sit with whatever feelings that we have. Like sometimes when we're really dissociated, we actually need to just sit and like just allow ourselves to feel whatever we can. Use that body scan, but if you feel something intense, go into it for a minute and see if you can actually be with discomfort, because that dissociation comes from like wanting to protect ourselves from how much discomfort we really feel. So when you're going through a lot of stuff throughout the day, it's very common to end the day in almost a highly activated freeze, where you're feeling so much, but you're almost like frozen because you're feeling so much, you know? So it's like you can feel like a panic inside almost. You can feel that activation inside, but there's like a numbness to it at the same time. So if we can just spend time throughout the day self-regulating, so that's like making sure we're eating food to signal safety to our nervous system, making sure we're drinking water, like simple things, not just for like self-care and wellness and all of the stuff, and you know, but like so that we actually are like having some body awareness throughout the day and giving some sense of safety to it. Making sure that we're not on our phones and computers all day, making sure we're taking breaks and moving a little bit, you know, taking breaks from reading the news, sitting with ourselves throughout the day and just doing some breathing exercises. Again, not from some woo-woo place, but truly to keep our nervous systems regulated. So that will help us get out of that freeze by the end of the day.
All right. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Like our other discussions, I want to keep this really to the point and really short. So we're going to wrap this one up.
Yes.
And then we will be back fairly soon, we hope, and start talking about how we can then begin to access those creative and productive parts of ourselves again, and you know, how we can begin to adapt once we've begun to understand how to self-regulate.
Yes.
So,
And remember too, with self-regulation, that we're working with our nervous system with that. And our nervous system is actually trying to help us. It's an alarm system to support us, but it just is wired for the past. It's not wired for the present moment. So we have to be the ones in charge of like rewiring it, if that makes sense. Like we have to be the ones, like that's what the self-regulation is doing, is we're wiring our own nervous systems to be accurate for what's actually happening.
but I love that to an extent, it is possible.
Oh yeah,
Like
it's definitely possible.
To an extent, you know, just the simple act of breathing activates, what was it?
The parasympathetic nervous system.
Thank you. I know what it activates, but judging by the last conversation we had, I was really gun shy about saying the word because I knew I would mess it all up. But I like that there's like a physically measured change that your controlled breathing exercises can actually activate your parasympathetic nerve system, which will have a measurable effect of bringing down your heart rate, of, you know, slowing everything down.
Yeah.
So that's what's fascinating to me. And that's what makes it not woo woo.
Yeah. It's actually not woo woo at all. It's just,
that there's science behind that. It's like, it's not about, you know, whatever. It's not about whatever, use this breathing app or use this whatever. It's literally like, just breathe and it will help. It's not the end all be all fix all, but it will help.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's what it does is it gives us more access to our full selves. And from there, we can problem solve better. We have access to more of our brains. We're out of just the lizard brain, the reptilian brain of survival mode. And we're now in our more whole brain, able to address the present moment easier.
I don't remember what book I was reading, but it was last week. And I read something in a book that made me think of you. which was about people trying to make decisions in really highly activated situations.
Yeah.
And it was a long chapter about that, but what it broke down to was that humans in general, and this is a gross generalization, but humans in general can't make good decisions when their heart rate is above 175. It's
No,
physically impossible
it,
for you to have good judgment with a heart rate that's above a certain level. And that obviously changes slightly person to person, but the fact that, you know, it's not like your actions are inexcusable above 175. However, if you want to be thinking clearly, you have to try to bring that down.
Yeah, and the reason for that, I don't know if the book said it, but the reason for that is that when you're in a high heart rate like that, most likely it's because your system got thrown into threat mode. Now it's in the survival mode, right? So it's like, that's like the go, go, go. And that's like saying basically like fight or flight, like, you know, like go, to protect yourself. When that happens, your prefrontal cortex goes offline. So your decision-making ability, the executive function part of your brain, goes offline completely, because that's how survival mode works. It prioritizes what is only needed for survival, but it's an animal type of survival. So even though as humans, we very often need our rational mind and our ability to think and make decisions for our human survival, our brains are wired like this, like reptilian, like animal instinct thing. So it goes into this old part of our brain, and we don't have that ability anymore. So it's like quite literally, we can't make those decisions in that time, and when we're in that state, rather.
Well, thank you so much for your amazing insight again. And we'll check back in soon and try to move forward. Thank you so much, Taryn.
Thank you, Bianca. Bye.
Bye.